Okay, today I'm actually going to explore something called the recovery relapse meter. Someone had posted it in a group I'm involved with online as kind of a joke because of the title and the overarching rainbow colors and the entire thing was kind of silly to look at. But I decided to actually take a peek at it. It's a book on Amazon.com about a relapse recovery meter, how to ensure you never have a relapse again. And naturally, of course, it's filled with the 12-step jargon. But before I get started on that, I was going to say that actually the way that we approach the term, I'm talking about something that I've kind of come to the conclusion of, is that the way that the word relapse is approached, to me, is actually completely flawed in a lot of different ways. But primarily because if you kind of, I guess the term would be deconstruct the whole entire premise around the word relapse is this idea of the way the cult of AA approaches it is you were a terrible drunk at one point in your life. Now you stop being a terrible drunk in your life by becoming a good, obedient cult member of the cult religion of AA. And if you ever drink again, you have now gone all the way back to being the worthless drunk that you were before the AA cult saved you from yourself. And really and truly, and it's one thing that's not really dialogued about or talked about enough is that when it comes to an addiction that's destroying your life, or like in my case when I was drinking myself to death, that very, very different approaches could be taken to the addiction itself. Now, like in my case where I was just a bottomed out drunk that was just, guzzling vodka first thing in the morning to stop the shakes or whatever, I came to a conclusion that it was just better for me to leave it alone altogether. But as I've said on here before, it wasn't because of a drunken binge that I ended up giving it up. It was because I was actually trying some controlled drinking, and I thought to myself, something, I really don't like what this is doing for me any longer, and I just decided to let it go. Some people might not choose to go on, I was a drunk, complete abstinence forever. They might not choose to go onto that particular path when they're approaching their addictive behaviors. They might choose to try to moderate. They might choose to try to, set aside time where, I don't drink during this time or drink on that time, or, different ideas or different approaches. Or somebody might say, well, maybe I'll just try smoking a little pot to get off my preferred drug that's destroying me or whatever. But another thing that's not talked about to me enough is the fact that that approach, or whatever it is you're doing, an approach to your addictive behaviors, could change over time. Like, maybe your goal in the very beginning is, hey, I don't want to be a completely, totally, hopelessly hooked through the bag drunk here, but at the same time, I really don't like to give up the pleasures of drinking, so maybe I'll try moderating for a little while. And if you try moderating for a little while, maybe it won't be for the rest of your life that you're going to be trying to moderate. Maybe at some point along the way, you might say, well, moderation was kind of fun, but I kind of feel like I'm past that now. Or you might say that I'm smoking pot here to try to keep from going back to being hopelessly dependent on booze. And then you might, in a few months, say, well, something that was fun while it lasted, but I kind of feel like I'm past that now, and I'm going to put that behind me. Too often times when the problem of addiction is approached, it's approached in this method of, here you are hopeless in your addiction. This is where you got to be to get out of that addiction. This is where you have to stay for the rest of your life. Failing to see that over time and over a period of whatever changes, transitional changes, things might shift and you might not have the same feelings about the addiction that you once had. There was the time in my life when I was just so severely addicted to booze that when I gave up the booze, I was like, okay, I can never do that again, ever again. I'd never want to do anything like that again. And then, of course, I would end up in another binge. But looking back on that, those binges, I wouldn't recommend anybody go through it. If you're the kind of drinker that I was, I would kind of recommend trying to stay away from it at all costs. And over time, it won't be a big deal to you any longer. But looking back on it, every single one of those binges happened after I had a period where I wasn't binging. And meaning that every single one of those binges kind of gave me a little bit of taste of, I've lived life without the booze, and it was not that bad. It was actually pretty tolerable. And now here I am waking up at 5 a.m. to guzzle liquor, and this isn't as tolerable as it was without it. So each little binge or each little failure or each little slip along the way kind of was helpful to me in becoming where I am now. It's not like, you did all these bad things because you were addicted Now you got to completely jump over into this category, stay in this category forever, and never to look at anything outside of that category for the remaining years of your life. You must be in this category or you'll go back to this category. I'm almost thinking that we need to restructure the way addiction is quit, because, if you go on a diet, for example, let's say you've got, and some people will say, well, eating is not as serious as this disease, if they're an AA cult member, but let's just say you go to the doctor and the doctor says, something, you're wandering over into the territory of diabetes, and, you're going to start having some heart problems really soon, and, some of these other health issues you're having, like pain in your back or whatever, is due to excess weight, and you might want to consider dieting. If you went on a diet and you started losing weight, and then you slipped somewhere along the way on your diet and you cheated, or let's just say you had a lazy day and you didn't exercise or whatever, you wouldn't look at that as, okay, I've completely failed, now I must go all the way back to square one, where I was before I even decided to try to do anything about my problem. You wouldn't do that. You would just say, okay, this was a kind of a fucked up day, and I'm going to start over again. I remember watching a video a couple of months ago about a guy that he went from like being 350 pounds to losing over 100-something pounds, and he did a little video diary thing, and like in the first 2 weeks, he was actually gaining weight rather than losing weight, and then when he lost like 3 pounds, he kind of looked at the camera and he said, well, hell, I'll take that, I mean, he didn't say, well, I gained 5 pounds in the first 2 weeks of trying to lose weight. It's a hopeless struggle. I give up. I'm completely useless. I'll never be able to do any better unless I radically alter my life altogether. A series of changes happens anytime you're trying to do anything in life, no matter what you're approaching. Whether it's learning a new skill or learning a new language even. I mean, you're going to have periods where you say, you know what, I was doing this for a while and it was working, but it's not working quite as well, so maybe I try doing this over here for a little bit, see if that helps. It kind of helps this, But anyway, I'm kind of getting on my own narrative about relapses, but I just decided to look at this silly-ass book for the sole purpose of just bashing on it a little bit, because I'm sure it'll be touted as, the absolute way to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's always people talking about how you really work the program, what you really want to do, and they'll say, well, meetings is not enough, or sponsors is not enough, prayer is not enough, They always keep shifting the goalpost around where you can never really be truly working the program, no matter what you're doing. Even if you lived and breathed AA meetings 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they'd say there's still something you're doing wrong if you're having an impure thought or something like that. Total cult religion that just espouses obedience above all and conformity above everything else. But what I find really funny is he starts out here with definitions. I used to love it how they would throw dictionary definitions around in meetings, and they would act like, oh my God, this is what the dictionary says. And it usually was not what the dictionary said. Like right here, he says relapse, a deterioration in someone's state of health after a temporary improvement. That's only partially true. Okay, a relapse in terms of a deterioration in your health after a temporary improvement would be like, let's say you're going through like what I did with the COVID thing. You feel like you're getting a little bit better, then a couple of days later your fever goes back up and the sinus congestion comes back full force, and you kind of go up and down like that until you finally get over it. That's kind of what he means in that term of relapse. But relapse, dictionary-wise, can also mean a returning to a former state. Most certainly is not all-encompassing as a health issue altogether. But then he actually throws in a definition for meter, a device that measures and records the quantity, degree, or rate of something. Whoa, that's some heavy shit right there that he came up with. So he begins this whole entire thing, and I'm clicking around here because I got multiple tabs open, but he's saying that he's been sober for however many years, and of course he says he's grateful, and of course he says that he sponsors people, and of course he says he goes to AA, and then he goes into this long braggadocious thing about how he's written numerous books and how he's had all these successful businesses. You've heard it before in meetings where they come in and they're like, since I quit drinking, I own 5 houses now and 25 trucks, and I own half the storefronts in the city, and I've met the President of the United States, and I've even talked to Congress, and Congress was bowled over by my ideas and suggestions. And then to top it all off, and he does it here in this book, they'll always say the same thing. I don't say any of this to impress anyone. I say it to show, and I'm like, you said it to impress everybody. I used to see a guy that would say, I haven't had a drink in 33 years, and I don't say that to impress anyone. And I thought, well, what are you saying it for? He's like, I say it because it impresses me. Clever little way to mask your whole entire egotistical self in this whole thing. I mean, they are masters at really what an AA member needs to do is write a book about how to brag about what a wonderful person you are without trying to actually brag about what a wonderful person you are. They'll say all these little tricks and things about, I don't say this to impress people. I say this to remind myself and be grateful. Yeah, a bunch of bullshit. That's all that is. But he goes on to say, I had to face the fact that working a program of recovery is difficult at any stage of sobriety. And I also had to face the fact that a person who's been sober 30 days should have the same seriousness that a person 30 years has towards their sobriety. Now, that's the kind of thing you would say in a meeting, and somebody would be like, and everybody would nod their heads and all of that kind of thing, because someone who hasn't had a drink in 30 days and someone who hadn't had a drink in 30 years, they both need to be in the same level of pure panic and pure terror about a drink. They can't possibly ever evolve past the drinking problem and say, something, I have a pretty cool life today. I've got my problems and I got my ups and downs, but all in all, I'm kind of living life better without drinking, and I don't really think about drinking anymore. No. You got to stay terrified for the same way that you would feel when you're first coming off alcohol, and 30 years later, you still got to be in that same state of hopeless terror. Otherwise, you will go back to it, according to this particular book. But he says, I've asked a lot of people why they relapsed. I always said the same thing. Why did you relapse? And they all say that they're confused. They look stunned. They look, well, first of all, I won't even keep reading all this bullshit here. But what really happens is sometimes it's a good day to drink. Sometimes there's no reason for a relapse. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you think, I really like the taste of the liquor going down my throat right now. It'd just be a perfect day. It doesn't have to be because there's a resentment. It doesn't have to be because something terrible's happening. It doesn't have to be because you had a memory that you stole a candy bar when you were 5 years old in kindergarten class and somebody else got the blame and now it's on you. You didn't put that on your fifth step. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It could just be sometimes my brain actually says now would be a good time to take a drink. I had a family member that said they haven't smoked in 20 years, but they said the one thing they loved to do when they drove, and they drive for a living, is smoke in their car. And they said every so often when they're driving along, even after 20 years, a thought will cross their mind, man, a cigarette would be nice right now. But they don't act on that, obviously, because it's been 20 years, and they don't go into a state of hopeless fucking terror and anxiety and confusion about it. It's like, it felt like a good day for one. So this is really the reason these people give these answers is because they really don't know, but they're required by the cult to give an answer. You have to say something when the cult asks you, why did you drink? So you have to say, well, I stopped going to meetings and I started isolating and didn't pray and didn't write down something on my fourth step and thought I was God. And, all these things that nobody actually really feels. What really happens is it was a good day to take a drink. But the answers are always the same. I forgot I was addicted. I never heard anybody in my entire life who ever had a severe addiction to booze or alcohol or drugs or whatever say they forgot they had an addiction to it. I'm pretty sure if you've gone through a lot of traumatic experiences as a result of your addiction, you don't forget that you were addicted to it. What bullshit here. Let's see. I had a problem that was too big. Well, that's pretty much life in general. I mean, if you wake up in the morning and you start driving down the highway and you hear this noise coming from the back engine of your car, you're thinking, oh my God, is this going to cost me $2,000, $3,000? Am I going to be driving along in traffic and a tire's going to fly off and my car is going to flip or whatever? I mean, that's kind of normal to have big problems or to take little problems and turn them into big problems. Life got good and I stopped going to meetings. Yeah, because you have to stay in meetings for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you will go back to drinking. If you're not sitting in meetings over and over and over again every day, 2-3 times a day, it's definite proof right there you're going to drink again. They don't count all the people that stopped going to meetings and didn't go back to drinking, but And then he says, at some point during this activity, I had to face the fact that working a program of recovery is difficult at any stage of sobriety, and having to measure your likelihood of relapse seemed overtly difficult when considering all the things an active member must do to stay sober. Well, I thought it was a suggested program where you didn't have to must do anything. I thought it was, but now you must do these things. It's kind of like the big book says it's suggested, but it says you'll die if you don't do it. I used to speak on topics like sponsor steps, pray, turn it over, sober people and places, one day at a time, helping others, higher power, working on care. Yeah, all the things we hear in meetings. I'm going to skip some of this stuff. And I've learned from going to meetings in other cities, there are many differences in the traditions, right? You know, have you ever heard people say they're not doing it right in other meetings? I've gone to other meetings and they don't have the same rigorous program that our meeting does here in this city. It's almost like the ever elusive, true AA meeting. It's kind of like the fountain of youth. It never gets found. It's just ever elusive. It's out there somewhere. And I've learned the different types of sober vernacular. Sober vernacular. There is no such thing as sober vernacular. There's cult speak, AA speak, but not sober vernacular. In one area of Cleveland that I call home, people often say, don't drink, go to meetings and pray. And I've learned this helpful suggestion leaves out a lot of requirements to prevent relapse. Right. No matter what the slogan is not good enough. In other words, the cult religion of AA can't explain itself simply enough, so it has to become more and more and more. In other words, what we told you was true about it is not really true. There's more to it than this. Otherwise, just doing the program's not working. You must do the real program. And I guess this guy is going to outline the real program. A lot of requirements to prevent relapse. And as a direct measure on the relapse meter, this is something he created, right? There's no actual entity called the relapse meter. It's not like a game show like The Price is Right where you spin the wheel, is it? It's only a 2 out of 5. You'll learn that this is called the danger zone. The danger zone. I mean, if you were a kid in the 80s, you probably heard the song Danger Zone, and you probably played an arcade, and you probably listened to it with your Walkmans or whatever, and you listened to the Danger Zone, or you saw Top Gun, but I'm guessing that's where you got the term Danger Zone from. I've never heard of Danger Zone anywhere else, but... So by providing this simple suggestion, you're setting up people that live in the danger zone for their entire sobriety. Wow. So in other words, if you don't drink for 10 years and you're in the danger zone by just praying and going to meetings, you're in the danger zone. And you could, at any given moment, at any given time, you could be possessed by some alcoholic spirit that's going to force you to go into a liquor store because you're in the danger zone. Things like this were very challenging to me, and for my sake, I needed to keep it simple. Well, if you needed to keep it simple, how come you... Something simplistic, okay, is something like saying when you're driving down the road, you need to stay on this side of the road and stay between the lines. And if you do that, you should be safe, and you're going the speed limit. It's not, you know what, if you're driving down the road, going the speed limit, and you're keeping it between lines, that's not real driving. You must do the real driving if you're going to listen to me. And I got to keep this simple for you. You're not keeping it simple. You're making it more fucking complex already. So I decided to take all the attributes and functions of a successful sober program, and move them into categories that was down to a manageable and measurable amount of tasks that every successful sober person does on a regular basis. Well, it's not really measurable outside of don't drink. Okay, you can't measure the fact that I haven't had a drink in a very long time versus someone else that hadn't had a drink in a long time. How are you going to measure that? Like measuring something is a diet plan where you say, you know what, I lost 10 pounds this week. Next, I lost 6 pounds this week. That's measuring. Okay, measuring is if you say, I used to smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day and now I'm down to 1. That's measuring. You can't really measure something that's not tangible, so... And this is only the preview, and he's already screwing it all up. I'm not going to pay $9.99 for this, okay? And one thing I've learned to start doing, rather than ask what happened when they relapse, I say, what were you doing 2 weeks before you relapse? It was this question that brought the most commentary and thought, and if they were unable to immediately answer the question, I would start to ask them follow-up questions, right? Because hey, it's like a job interview. You can't say, you know what, 2 weeks before I relapsed, I was feeling pretty good. Week before I relapsed, I was feeling pretty good. 3 days before I relapsed, I was actually feeling kind of cool. I just woke up one day and I just said, you know, I would really like to try some substance today or whatever. Were you going to meetings or taking others to meetings and active in service? Well, what does he mean by active in service? He just said going to meetings and praying is not enough. So, I mean, what do you mean by active in meetings? In other words, you're going to meetings, but you're not correctly going to the meetings, I guess is what he's saying. Were you working the steps or helping another to work them? Well, what about like me when I was in the middle of when I was doing steps and I was chairing meetings and I was talking to sponsors and I was making their lousy coffee and everything and I still left the meeting and drank? What about that? Does that not count in your meter to success or whatever this is? I mean, does that not work when it doesn't follow the narrative? Were you improving your relationship with your higher power, or helping another person to find the higher power and pray and meditate? Well, if the so-called higher power is your own conception, how am I going to help you find it? Isn't it your conception? If I'm helping you find your higher power, isn't that me telling you what your higher power is and what it must think? And how do you improve a relationship with a so-called AA higher power? How do you do that exactly outside of going to meetings? I mean, do you go to the mall and you say, do you like this CD, higher power? If this CD doesn't sound good to you, I'll get another CD. I mean, how do you improve your relationship with your higher power? Does your higher power call you on the phone and say, that 4-step you did today, it was okay, but there's room for improvement there. You might want to think about next week getting improved on that, or I'll hit you with a drunk stick. Did you call, eat, golf, bike, have coffee with, or any other of the many activities we do with friends who are sober and in support groups? In other words, you don't have any spare time on your hands. You can't go to a meeting with, you can't go and just play golf with a few of your buddies. You can't go out and go to a concert unless you're surrounded by AA people. In other words, the cult must be in every aspect of your existence. Did you go to the bathroom today? Did you take a sponsor with you? After I asked these questions, the people's eyes opened, and although they were still hanging their head because they felt depressed from their actions, they began to realize subconsciously they'd stopped doing the things that got them sober in the first place. Subconsciously, right? I was doing all these things, and I was doing all these steps and going to all these meetings and everything, but deep way down inside, there's a part of me that nobody else knows about. It was already ready to do the drinking thing, and I wasn't even aware of it. I was guilty of thought crime and didn't know I was guilty of thought crime. And then it says, a person with multiple years of sobriety can easily get caught up in the good life and forget that sobriety is fragile. Well, how are you going to get caught up in the good life if everything you do is surrounded by AA people? I mean, you're supposed to have a life beyond your wildest dreams when you're in AA, but you might get caught up in the good life doing that, I guess. If I want to stay sober, then I have to be willing to work at it. Oh my God, are we going to hear that again? I used to hear that all the time. Well, I have to do the work. What work? Sitting in meetings and telling everybody what a major badass you were when you were a drunk and how you're not anymore because you call your sponsor. Is that work? I mean, it's work to have to listen to that shit day in and day out. I mean, if you've ever sat in an AA meeting and had to listen to these people preach, it's a strain and a torture to have to go through that. So that is, in truth, actual work. Although it's more like torture. The truth is that work in a program is all-encompassing and extremely vague at the same time. It's all-encompassing, but it's vague at the same time. In other words, if I'm teaching you how to ride a motorcycle, I say that you got to pay attention to the gears, you got to pay attention to your balance, you got to pay attention to the brakes, you got to pay attention to the road, you got to look way down the road to make sure there's no potholes or bumps or anything. But this is vague, At the same exact time, it's vague how to really ride a motorcycle. I can't tell you really how to properly do it, but you got to be willing to do it. I mean, how is something all-encompassing and vague at the same time? I mean, if somebody says your transmission is broken down and you say, well, is that what will fix the car? And then you say, well, I don't know for sure because a transmission problem is all-encompassing, but it's vague. Would you get a new mechanic if they gave you an answer like that? Below are the 5 tools of the relapse meter. Meetings, sponsorship, steps, higher powers, friends. Meetings, sponsorship, steps, higher power, friends. Isn't that what we're told in all these cult meetings anyway? I mean, what is radical about this? Let's see. There was something else that I wanted to grab on. To me, to relapse is to die. Well, see, that's the problem right there. To relapse is not to die. To relapse is to relapse. To relapse sometimes is just realizing, something, I made a mistake and I want to reevaluate. Sometimes when you relapse can be a great thing. You can take a relapse and say, had a few beers last night, didn't really like that buzz, and now today I got a dry mouth and I'm got a headache and I feel kind of nervous and I don't really like this beer drinking anymore. I think I'm going to give it up. It certainly doesn't mean because you took a drink the night before you're going to die. It's this kind of panic, fear-based bullshit that they preach in AA that causes so many dangerous relapses and people to die. This is a serious program that takes work to be successful. This is a serious program. This used to kill me how in those meetings they would always say, this is a serious thing. This is a serious thing. Well, if it's really that serious and you're really that worried about people dying and you're really that worried about really stopping this problem altogether, why don't you evaluate the way you've been doing things for the past 20, 30 years or 80 years, really, when it comes to AA? Why don't you say, you know what? We've been doing this AA thing for a few decades now, and for a few decades we haven't had that much success. We have had a lot of failures with this, so maybe we should relook at the way we're approaching addiction. Maybe we should approach it from another angle. Maybe we shouldn't stop telling people the same old cliched bullshit that they've been hearing for the past 80 years and hoping that it'll work for a small, tiny minority of them. Maybe if you really care about people dying, you might radically overhaul everything that you know about addiction and be willing to say, well, you know what? This guy out here, he's killing himself, drinking himself to death every day. What if we told him that he could moderate? What if we told him that he could finally get to a place where he could be abstinent, but it might take a little time or it might take a little experimentation? What if we did that rather than throw this one-size-fits-all religious cult bullshit at somebody? And then he goes on about the 5 tools that you need. These 5 tools are the same things you hear in every fucking meeting. It doesn't matter if you got 30 days or 30 years. I encourage you to explore this book. Yeah, because it costs $9.99 per copy. If you have long-term sobriety, you may be saying to yourself, this is too simple. Or there's no way that these 5 tools incorporate a complete and healthy program. Actually, more than likely, someone who's got 30 years of sobriety, they're going to read this book. They're going to take a few lines that are going to sound good in the meeting, and they're going to pass them off as their own. What's really even funnier in conclusion, he says that by the time you follow these 5 tools, you'll be able to confidently and successfully teach other people how to stay sober. What he really means is you will be confident in how to recruit other members to the cult by telling people who really need real information and that there's real ways to approach their problems and there's real ways to approach their addiction. You're going to tell them that they just need to go to meetings and do steps and obey their sponsors and do all those other kind of things. And there's the people that will say, it didn't matter what they told me when I got here. I would have done anything they told me. I would have stood on my head. Well, that's ridiculous. Okay, that's bullshit. If you went to a doctor and you told the doctor, my lower back is killing me right now because I've been lifting a lot on the job, and the doctor said, well, go get a hammer and slam it into your foot. That'll make the pain go away. Would you actually do it? I mean, if you're in a lot of pain, back pain that I'm making in this particular example, wouldn't you say, well, no, wait a minute, that's not going to help the freaking back pain. I'm willing to try anything to get rid of the back pain, but that bullshit is not going to help. I just think it's really comical that you got these people out here that are always talking about the ever-elusive true program, but then they'll say it's a simple program. It's not a simple program if you got to shroud it in a whole bunch of double talk and a lot of gibberish and blabber to try to make it sound like whatever you're doing is not good enough. When I had I've talked about toxic family members on here, it became painfully obvious to me after a few decades that no matter what I did, it was never good enough. No matter what I did, it was never going to measure up to their standards because that was going to be a complete impossibility. So even if you did read this book, and even if you did do all these things, and even if you do attend meetings, if you drink again, you are a pariah. You did something totally wrong, something terribly wrong with you. Maybe it's just a stepping stone along the way to whatever goal you want to reach in life, be it abstinence or be it moderation or whatever it is. It still should be up to the individual to decide. And just because someone has drank themselves into a state of, like I had done, and where you had lost everything and where you were practically homeless and where your health was failing, doesn't mean that throwing something at them like this that's not going to give them any tools whatsoever that's useful to them is doing anybody any good or saving anybody any lives. But anyway, that's pretty much all I needed to cover in this one. I'll link the silly book in there. Maybe the guy will pay me for giving him a free promotion for it, because I'm sure there'll be a cult member or two that'll sneak up in the comments and say, well, I'd never even heard of this book until I saw you bashing it, and then I knew I was going to have to buy it right there. Until next time.